So I have a confession to make. I never owned a Neo Geo back when they launched in 1990. I simply couldn't afford one, but that never stopped me from dreaming about owning one for years. I first played a Neo Geo in a 7-Eleven in 1991. It was a 4-slot cabinet that had Magician Lord, 2020 Baseball, Fatal Fury, and NAM 1975 on it. I was absolutely blown away. I followed the hardware closely, and when SNK released the home system, the AES, it blew my mind. The home hardware was identical to the arcade. This was truly the first arcade hardware that would come to the home without compromise, and when Metal Slug was released, I was convinced that nothing in video games would ever top it. Metal Slug is a 2D run-and-gun masterpiece and pushed the hardware to heights that I never thought would be possible. This of course was all due to the Neo Geo hardware itself. The Neo Geo is powered by a Motorola 68000 running at 12 MHz. The 68K was a very popular chip in both the arcades and the home at the time. A secondary Zilog Z80 coprocessor was used for the audio controller, but it's the custom chipset found in the hardware that really pushed the hardware above and beyond anything else that was available in the homes. The GPU chipset is made up of 5 different chips that perform various tasks, but the end result is that the hardware is capable of 380 sprites on screen at any given time, which can be a maximum size of 16 by 512 pixels in size. This is from a palette of over 65,000 colors with 4,096 available at once. The 320 by 224 pixel display is managed by a powerful 24-bit data bus. Many advertisements for the Neo Geo claimed that this was the first 24-bit home system, and this of course is due to the GPU. Technically, the processor, the Motorola 68000, is only 16 bits, but this didn't matter. Although the Neo Geo is a 2D system, it does not actually use scrolling tile map background layers like other home systems such as the Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. Scrolling backgrounds are simply managed by stitching sprites together. Take for example these backgrounds in Metal Slug. These are actually individual sprites that we are re-adding to form the background itself. In other words, we're adding 16 by 224 pixel sprites, one at a time. This is also done for each background layer, including the main character sprites as well. With an emulator, we can individually turn on and off each of the sprite data in the game, and as you can see, with all the sprites re-added, we can reconstruct this scene in Metal Slug. It goes without saying, and one of the big features of the Neo Geo is that sprites can also be scaled. This of course is done via the hardware. Sprite scaling of course can be seen in many games, especially in fighting games such as Samurai Showdown, where the camera appears to zoom in and out depending on the action. Let's take a look at this example. This is Metal Slug 1. In this scene, how many sprites do you think are actually being used? Well, the results may surprise you. On first glance, it may look like it's using almost the maximum amount of sprites allowed, which is 360 on screen at once. But the reality is, if we take a closer look and start deconstructing this scene, it's using about 95 sprites. And even with this simple example, we can quickly understand why the Neo Geo is a 2D sprite monster of a console. There are also 3 separate planes that sprites can be drawn into, and this is what gives the games their traditional classic parallax scrolling effects. It's also important to note that there is no bitmap mode or traditional tile modes. Sprites is what makes the Neo Geo what it is. There is, however, another layer known as Fix. The Fix layer is a non-scrollable tile-based layer with transparency, which has the most priority on the display. Its main use is to display text, or things like heads-up displays or scores or health bars in fighting games. It's very similar to the window layout that's found in the Nintendo Game Boy architecture. In the arcades, the MVS cabinet came in different configurations, with 1, 2, 4, or even 6 slot variants. Games came on cartridges that remind you of something like a VHS tape. Each MVS cartridge comes with 2 individual PCBs, known as CHA and prog boards. CHA contains the C-ROM that holds sprite data, the M-ROM contains the Z80 data, and the S-ROM contains the Fix graphics. The second board, known as prog, contains a P-ROM. This contains the 68K program code, and the V-ROM, which contains all audio samples. So back in the day, if you were an arcade operator and you wanted to purchase Neo Geo MVS cartridges, you would receive it in something like this. This is known as a kit, and this is just a piece of cardboard, and this is what all the MVS cartridges would have come in when you had purchased one. Now this is from Japan. This is the Japanese version of King of Fighters 99. And if we open this up, you can see that you get move strips that come with the game itself, and these are obviously things that you can insert into your cabinet. You also receive the marquee holder. So in an MVS cabinet, you probably are familiar with the marquee areas where you can actually install this to let people know what game you've got running in the arcade. Now this obviously is the star of the show. This is the MVS cartridge that you would plug into your MVS motherboard, whether you had a 1 slot, 2 slot, 4 or 6 slot. And this is the Japanese version of King of the Fighters 99. You can see that the label is printed in Japanese and it's made in Japan. Now a North American MVS cartridge looks exactly the same. The only real difference is the label itself is printed in English, and there is a unique kind of style about these cartridges, as well as a serial number here to let you know what number of cartridge was printed off the assembly line. As Neo Geo games became larger in size from their original limits, SNK would introduce various additional chips into cartridges that would allow for bank switching data, such as the Neo CMC. These chips would also be used to implement copy protection. Just like many arcade games at the time, Neo Geo games were subject to bootlegging and duplication. The addition of encryption of data would be important to mitigate this. Copy protection chips became quite important for the Neo Geo, and there are 3 main types that were introduced in 1998. The first would be C-ROM encryption or sprite data. The CMC42 and CMC50 protection chips would handle this. King of Fighters 99 would be the first game to use C-ROM encryption, and each game after King of Fighters 99 would contain encrypted graphics. A second form of encryption, known as PROM encryption, would simply be responsible for decrypting previously encrypted 68,000 program data. The third was VROM encryption. This would encrypt all audio sample data, and the decryption method was used in later games such as Metal Slug 5, SNK vs Capcom, and Samurai Showdown 5, just to name a few. Now all of these encryption methods work simply by applying a table of 256 values, known as an exclusive OR table, to a decryption algorithm. While initially very challenging to defeat, there were weaknesses found that would expose it to a known plain text attack. Many games would contain the exact same decryption tables, but later games would also include their own encryption methods. But it wouldn't be long before bootleggers were able to discover the decryption methods in Neo Geo sprite, sound and program data to replicate their own games, and they would even go as far as including their own encryption with their own unique 256-byte tables. On the audio side, the Neo Geo uses a Yamaha YM206010 that provides 15 channels for sound, with 4 FM, 3 SSG, 1 noise and 7 PCM channels. So what did SNK change when they brought the MVS hardware to the home? Well, very little. In fact, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. The original plan for the AES was that it would only be used in hotels and bars as a rental system, but demand for the product ultimately led to SNK releasing the consoles in stores in North America. The specification of the AES then is 99.98% identical to the MVS, and this is one of the biggest selling points of the Neo Geo. The home console was priced at $649 in the US in 1990, and games would retail for over $200 in price. This wasn't a kid's toy. The AES was meant for the hardcore arcade enthusiast that had disposable income, or rich parents, and it would bring the exact experience home without limitations. This of course was a risky move for SNK, but they would note that there was a gap in the market and they took advantage of it. In an interview with Eurogamer in 2021, SNK game developer Nobuyuki Kuroki said the following: "We had this idea that we were going to make these arcade cabinets, but it was about bringing that entertainment home. We were in the same market as other competitors, but we had two ways of getting capital. It wasn't about going directly to beat the other competitors, and more about seeing if there was room for us here. The AES would launch at a high price, but everything about the system was premium. The joystick was brilliantly crafted with satisfying micro switches on the controller, and also has very responsive buttons, and the layout is perfect, capturing that classic 4-button MVS layout. The AES is also the very first home console to feature a memory card slot for saving games to. This was years before Sony would introduce it with the PlayStation 1. In the arcades, some NEOGEO MVS cabinets would also contain memory slots. This meant that you could play at home, save your position in game, then load up the game as you played in the arcades. This concept would become more mainstream during the Sega Dreamcast era. With Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Dreamcast, it would be possible to swap playable characters between the Dreamcast and the Sega Naomi using the VMU. SNK would make the decision to not allow MVS games to run on home AES systems and vice versa. They wanted to keep both markets separate. The pin layouts between MVS and AES are different, but an AES cartridge contains the same CHA and PROG dual boards that's found on the hardware. Originally, AES cartridges cost around $200, and they were much cheaper than MVS titles. However, that has not been the case for many years. In fact, most collectors get into NEOGEO by starting out with MVS cartridges because they are much cheaper these days in general. The high cost of AES cartridges and collectors has turned many people away from ever purchasing an AES system. Now the good news is you don't need to resort to purchasing original hardware and original games to play NEOGEO in 2022. Emulators such as MAME and FB Neo have been emulating NEOGEO for many years, and the emulation quality is of the highest caliber. There's also the Mr. project. There's a really great FPGA core for the NEOGEO that you could try out and really get your fix that way. And there's also other options on the Switch. You can individually purchase specific NEOGEO games off the eShop. And SNK themselves have also released a SNK NeoGeo Mini, which has a curated selection of NeoGeo games. I don't have this device, but I've heard it's pretty good. So yeah, there's really no reason why you can't play NeoGEO games in 2022. Now, of course, if you're wanting to get original hardware, that's going to be a different conversation. Unfortunately, you're going to be paying a lot of money to get NeoGEO AES games. There is a small selection of games that are pretty cheap, but once you start moving away from those, you're going to start paying over $500, and all of a sudden you're thousands of dollars in. So it's not really something that I can recommend. In fact, I don't have anywhere near of a big AES collection. I've only got a handful of games myself because the collecting market is just absolutely ludicrous. If you do want original hardware though, I would say pick up an AES and maybe take a look at some of the multi-carts that are out there that have basically the entire set of games on one cartridge that you can play. I think that is the best value for money if you are looking for original hardware. But of course, you don't really need to these days. Like I said, there are many different options out there, and you know, Raspberry Pi as well is a great one. Load up a Raspberry Pi with emulators and your NeoGEO ROMs and you'll have an absolute blast on that, I guarantee you. But guys, we are going to leave it here for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this episode, please leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.